Thank you for your patience. We'll get started in just a minute. All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Lean Conference. This morning's session is Different Isn't Always Better, but Better is Always Different by Jennifer Hari. My name is Jeannie Bowen, and my pronouns are she, her. I would like to thank our ASL interpreter, Ash, and our CART live closed captioner, Jamie. We really appreciate your assistance today. I'm going to share a few things with you about Zoom webinar before we get going. All right. So at the bottom of your Zoom webinar, you should notice a toolbar, and there are several features in that toolbar. One of those features is the chat feature, and today chat will be turned off. However, question and answer will be open. So please feel free to ask your questions at any time during the presentation, and I'll be looking through those and we'll be answering as many as we can at the end of Jennifer's presentation. We also have closed captioning. If you would like to turn closed captioning on, you'll notice the CC button down at the bottom, and you just click that and you'll have that available to you. If for some reason we run into some tech troubles, we will try to work on those for about 5 minutes. And if we are unable to resolve them, then we're going to record Jennifer's presentation at a later time and make sure that's available to you. The presentation materials are on our website now, and the video recording of the session will be up on our website in about a week. We're going to be providing a direct link to those presentation materials to you in our chat feature, if you'd like to pull those up. Ooh. Without further ado then, I would like to introduce Jennifer Hari. Jennifer is a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt and organizational anthropologist who brings her talent to the nexus of culture and process, helping teams create futures designed to improve the human condition. Jennifer lives in Olympia and on traditional lands of the Nisqually people, now home to the Hari family, amazing humans, dogs, and farm animals who have taught her to apply her talents while always in learning mode. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jeannie. And welcome to all of you. I'm going to share my screen now. Apologies, I just froze for a moment. I'm going to actually stop my video so that doesn't happen again. I did receive some feedback last year about that. To let you know, I do this because it helps with my broadband. So apologies if not seeing my face is distracting to you. I'd rather do this than let my face and voice freeze like it just did. So perhaps pretend you're listening to a podcast and sit back and enjoy. As Jeannie mentioned, I do live on a farm, and that means sometimes you may hear barnyard noises or perhaps a train. I may stop briefly if a train comes by because it's hard to talk over when the whistle blows. I usually use those moments to take a sip of water. I would encourage you to do the same thing, or maybe look up from your screen. So it's not 18 inches from you. Just take a healthy moment whenever you feel like you have the need. So good morning to all of you. Thank you for taking time to think a little bit about change this morning. As Jeannie said, I'm Jennifer Hari. Today marks my 10th time presenting at the Lean Conference with the state of Washington. So quick thanks to the Results Washington team for continuing to provide this opportunity for all of us. Today, I hope you're here to think a little bit about doing something differently tomorrow than how you do it today. I decided on this topic after hearing a client recently say, well, we could wait to try out our new idea. But as Jennifer always says, different isn't always better, but better is always different. And I thought, yeah, I do always say that. And I believe it. At least now I do. So let me take you back a few decades. You see, I wasn't always a big fan of change. In fact, if you ask my mother today, she will still tell you that when I was a little girl, I resisted change hard. This little brown-haired girl in the front of the photo is me, around 3 or 4 years old, rehearsing for a ballet recital. My parents tell me after that recital, they met me backstage and I broke down into tears saying, but I want to do 7 more dances. For me, I was always in flow doing whatever I was doing, and I didn't want to change because I felt happy or comfortable with whatever I was captivated with in the moment. I feel to a certain extent like I've gotten better with change as I've gotten older, especially because my career is rooted in change. I am always learning new things or working with new teams or trying something new to make what I'm already doing a little bit better. And now I don't always break out in tears when I have to do something different. So different isn't always better. Doing something differently doesn't guarantee that we're actually going to get better results. Today, I hope to share with you some practical ideas to help you as an individual contributor, process improvement facilitator, project manager, leader, human being, change maker, catalyst, change for the better and not just for the sake of change. I've been very privileged to be invited in to work with teams across industries, from the boardroom to the operating room to literally the sewer, wherever people are working and trying to make things better. And I wouldn't be honest if I told you that I haven't seen more challenges than I've seen successes. But the successes are what keep me going and inspire me to bring some of what I've learned for your consideration today, as much as I can do in 45 minutes. So let's start by getting your input. I'd like to have you help us choose our adventure for how today will go. I'm going to put 3 change challenges in front of you, and then we're going to open a poll to have you select the one you'd like me to focus on first. Here we go. The first change challenge is the river of constant change. You might notice that it feels like a challenge when change is coming at you or your team hard, furious, and constant. It may feel exhausting to try to keep up with change. And it's hard to know how any one change is going because you have multiple changes overlapping at all times, splitting up your focus. Change may be coming at you from every single angle, and it's just hard to keep up. One of my clients recently told me it's always something new, and it's to the point where it's exhausting because we don't know when the next change is coming or how it's going to go. I just want things to feel normal, but I can't even remember what normal feels like. So that's the river of constant change. The second change challenge is boomerang change. You keep designing and making attempts to implement change, but nothing sticks. I once coached a leader who mentioned to me that the improvement event we were working on was for a process the team had won an award on and had been featured in a professional journal for. But now the process was broken and she wasn't clear why that happened. Boomerang change feels like backsliding and constantly wondering what happened to that thing we did last week, last month, last year. The third change challenge that I would offer for you today is change as the immovable rock. So hard to get anything to change. Sometimes this looks like making plans for the planning phase and then checking on how the planning went without ever actually getting to doing anything. Or maybe arguing about what change to implement and no one agrees, so you do nothing and you're on to the next thing. Or we don't have time to implement, so we miss the deadlines that just keep getting slid further out and further out. And maybe you're ready to get to the good stuff, but it feels like pushing a rock uphill to get anything to change. So I'd like to open up the poll now and have you vote for one of these three: the river of constant change, the boomerang where nothing sticks, or change is the immovable rock. And then we'll dive into whichever gets the most votes first. All right, so tech team, let's close the polls and see what the vote is. Ooh, I'm excited. All right, the river, followed by the boomerang, followed by the rock. That's interesting that there's plenty of votes for each. It feels like these are all equally interesting challenges to you all. So let's get going. But before we do, I want you to take out a piece of paper or find the electronic device that you use to take notes, or however you're doing that today. And I want you to think about a change that you're anticipating at work. What do you know that's coming downriver to you or your team? And it may help you to have that in mind today as we talk. I want you to record that, if you will, on your notes. And as you listen today and you hear an idea or a thought that you want to come back to, I'm going to give you time for that as we move through today's topics. Maybe you hear something that might help you with this particular change. Record it, write it down, type it out, however you're taking notes today. And at the end, I hope you have at least one suggestion you can try in relation to the change you're anticipating. All right, y'all wanted to ride the river. Here we go. Ah, yes, that raging river of change, where change happens so fast it feels like navigating the whitewater rapids every single day. This is a different change problem than the other two. It's about change fatigue and the constant stress that constant change can put on teams and humans who crave some sort of stability. So let's talk about some strategies. First, let's talk about the demand for change. If you feel like change is happening frequently and quickly, think about how to sort the change you're experiencing into changes driven from your team versus changes that you might be able to influence the pace on, versus changes that affect your team but don't really yield to your timeline. So those are things like system changes that are thrust upon you, policies or laws that get passed along to you that you have to figure out how to implement, maybe even leadership changes that bring new leaders with new areas of focus your way. So the drawing on the left is called a circle of influence, and that can be a tool to help you sort through which changes you have influence over, put those changes in the circle of control. Changes you have influence over, that's that middle circle, and the circle of concern, the outer circle. If you're loading up work, start from the outside and work your way in as you have capacity. So that might help you meter changes that you want to bring into the team. You can also use a Kanban with this by prioritizing the backlog of changes and limiting changes in progress that you have in your team. So you're managing demand. Let me give you an example of this from a real case. So I worked with a public works department in a city recently who was struggling to find a way to prioritize their over 100 possible projects. Everything from maintenance tasks that needed to be done, to water towers or whatever, to new sewer systems, to build in areas of the city that were being built up, to transportation projects that were going in to dig up roads. And if they were going to do maintenance projects on the pipes underneath, now is a good time to do that. Most folks don't like having their new roads torn up after they're built. So these are the types of projects that needed to get done. And the public works folks had little to no influence on all of them when they would happen. Those projects got loaded first, as well as anything that was deemed an emergent need, like fixing broken pipes or things of that sort. Within the things that they could decide to do, they had those prioritized lower in their prioritized backlog. They loaded only three projects for their engineers. That's that work in progress. They used to have as many as 12 projects loaded on an engineer, and that caused delays of all sorts as their engineers were constantly switching between projects and had to prioritize among things that were already underway. And the team was able to improve the number of projects that they could get done by ensuring that they were prioritizing the work that was headed their way. The lesson here is meter your demand for change where you can. Limit the number of work in progress folks can focus on and create more of a steady flow for changes than that raging river. Speaking of change, there are many change management models out there. I'm familiar with dozens. On this page, I have ProSize ADKAR model, Bridges transition model, Lewin's change model, and the DMAIC method. Those are just a handful. It might surprise you to hear I don't have a favorite, or actually I do. My favorite is the one that works consistently for you and your team or agency or organization. That might feel super obvious, but let me explain. Often what can exacerbate our change fatigue is not just the number of changes that are coming at us, but the uncertainty of how that change is going to unfold. I'm surprised by the number of times that I ask a team what change model they use, and there isn't one method. Having a common approach to how we deal with change really helps us deal with change fatigue by knowing there's a reliable process for how the change will be implemented that we can count on, and that works for us. Please look at the change you identified when I asked you earlier. And I want you to ask yourself, what model do we use or will we use for this change? If you're thinking to yourself, I don't know, this would be an excellent time to ask your leader, or perhaps you are that leader, what can we do to develop a standardized model for change that'll work well for our team? All right. For our river of change, sometimes, in my experience, this happens because those upstream of us don't understand that they're the ones who create change on our behalf. I highly recommend taking time to map out who's upstream of you and your process that you're looking at changing. Who's downstream of you in your process? They might be able to give you information that would help you prioritize changes by understanding what's important upstream and downstream. If you find that some of the changes are coming from upstream or being requested from downstream, you can often negotiate on what's important, or maybe even timing that would work and give you better quality changes. One team I worked with recently was an IT team that felt completely overwhelmed by the number of changes requested by their organization. By looking at the organization's process for strategic and operational planning, that's a function that was upstream of them, and asking for a seat at the table, they were able to add input on timing, understand scope better, build in prioritization that allowed them to pull work rather than have work pushed their way. If we can slow the force with which water is put into our river system, we can get a better flow and maybe push more water through more smoothly without burning folks out. So right now, look at your change you identified earlier, and I want you to write one upstream and one downstream contact that might be worth connecting with. And then we'll move on. I'm going to give you a moment to think about that. Who's upstream and who's downstream? All right, I've actually got a timer here. That was 20 seconds. So I give you a little bit of time to think about that before I head into the next topic. Yes, the boomerang. Changes that bounce back or getting changes to take hold for longer than a minute. This has lots of different versions, from implementing point improvements and then seeing teams backslide to either what they were doing before or doing some less than ideal version of a process, to trying lots of different things and not finding one to stick. For those of you who selected boomerang, maybe be thinking about what you're experiencing in terms of changes that bounce back as we move into some ideas for this. One of the reasons changes don't stick is a perception from teams sometimes that this is just another flavor of the day, week, month, pick your favorite time interval here. In some teams or organizations, there's a history of maybe unpopular or even popular ideas not getting traction. And folks have learned a, frankly, sometimes successful strategy of ignoring it until the next thing comes along. If we don't ever implement, we won't have to do it. And if they're right, it means no one checked to make sure new changes were implemented and how they were working. If that feels like the boat that you're in now, with flavor of the day or week or month, there's a lot to do to ensure changes are supported through implementation. And I wish I had a quick fix for you. This one's a multifactorial problem that you might start with asking, why are changes not implemented with fidelity? Do some root cause analysis and start working through those root causes one at a time. Countermeasures can include making sure the team is included in the change. We're going to talk a little bit about that, how to do that later. Measuring outcomes so you can tell whether or not things are working. Going to Gemba, the workplace, to find out whether the ability or motivation was a factor. Maybe folks didn't get enough training to really know how to do it, or something was broken when they went and tried and they weren't able to come back. Or maybe it was motivation. They just didn't want to do it. Sometimes we get into whatever's our comfort zone and we never quite get there. There's a lot to unpack here. So perfect time to drop in a controversial opinion, maybe, we'll see, about best practices. Here's what I've learned typically happens when teams are interested in learning what others who are successful at doing a process do to achieve those results. They say, let's go learn about how team X at organization ABC does this work. And so they do a go-see. They learn about what they've implemented, and then they come back and they try to implement the best practice. And it doesn't have the same impact. And they wonder what went wrong and possibly revert back to what they were doing in the first place, hence the boomerang. Here's what I think sometimes goes wrong with best practices. We start with the best intentions. I love to be inspired by what others have done that is cool and wonderful and getting great results. It's one of my favorite things. The problem is we don't often ask what problem those practices were designed to solve for, or what was the journey the team took to develop those best practices, or What conditions cause the success? What conditions need to be there for the change to be successful? Imagine our best practice is pouring baking soda into vinegar and being impressed with what happens. Note, if you don't know, try it, but be prepared for a bit of a mess. Then we go back to our team and we pour baking soda into water and we're wondering, why didn't it work the same way? The conditions are different. Vinegar is not the same as water. And so trying the same thing isn't going to have the same result. If you're experiencing boomerang results from trying what others have done, try asking those with the best practices that you're interested in why they implemented what they did. Ask what problems they were solving, maybe what they tried that didn't work and why. Ask why their approaches work and note where they are different from you and where you might need to vary, but don't just follow their script. Writing your own is going to help your team come along for the ride too. And we know people support what they help to create. You may hear great practices from some of the case studies that you hear over the course of this conference. I'm here on day 2. You might have many more that you're going to listen to and participate in. Ask what you can adopt and what you can adapt from them. This one included. Let's get real about another boomerang problem, backsliding. Ooh, that looks fun. I once helped a nursing team, the day shift of a nursing team at a hospital, reorganize their equipment and supply room to better meet their needs. And they came in the very next day to the night shift, having returned everything to how it was, with a sweet note asking that they please not move things around. All their hard work was undone. That might be an extreme example. In this case, the team needed to include both shifts to make sure that everything worked for both daytime and nighttime. But backsliding can happen for many other reasons too. When implementing change, include processes to ensure that the team has a way of knowing how the new process is working and whether or not it's getting the results it was designed to get. I have 2 suggestions of many for this. The first one for you today is design the change to prevent backsliding. Let me give you an example. I worked in healthcare back in the day when we went from doctors keeping handwritten files on every patient to an electronic medical record or an EMR. For a period of time, and honestly, a lot longer time than we really wanted, we had a system of shadow files, handwritten files, and the EMR, which not only feels like double the work without double the benefit at best, but was potentially a quality problem, having information in only one of those systems. It was only when they took away filing cabinets that some of the doctors who had been resisting the change took strides to learn to dictate or type or embrace the EMR as the sole system. That's one example of designing a change to prevent backsliding. Take out what they need and prevent backsliding. Another suggestion is to have a regular practice of checking on the process. Are people using the process? Is it still the best way to do something? Has anything broken, or are there any barriers to using that process? Checking on the process can involve leaders doing standardized work audits, having huddles to help check on new processes, either daily or at some other cadence that makes sense. Maybe conducting a 30, 60, 90-day check-in with the team on how the process is going, assigning a process owner for each process. So it's someone's role to make sure that we're continually improving. Anything to keep the new process in the forefront. Also, checking with results is important. If we aren't asking ourselves, how's the process working, with evidence and measurement to tell us it's working better today than it did yesterday, then can we really blame folks for wanting to go back to something they knew worked? Looking at the change challenge you identified earlier, is backsliding something you anticipate being an issue? If you think yes, ask yourself, what can I put in place to prevent backsliding or signal when it might be occurring? One of my favorite topics is thinking through making change sticky. In a world where some things go viral, how do we leverage that concept in our work environment to gain traction and maintain momentum? One of my favorite brother duos, the Heath brothers, Chip Heath, who is an organizational behavior professor at Stanford, and his brother, Dan Heath, who's a researcher, have written numerous books that I highly recommend on this topic. Made to Stick, which focuses on getting messages to be sticky, and Switch, that is an in-depth look at how to help difficult changes. One of the themes that I've noted in both of these is the compelling story, which sticks more than a rational argument. Right now, I want you to take a look at the change you identified earlier in this session. And underneath that, please write or type, what is a compelling story that I can tell that relates to this change? What is a compelling story I can tell that relates to this change? Let me give you an example of what I mean. I was having a hard time rationalizing and convincing leaders to go to the Gemba or to do a go-see when they were problem solving in an organization. I asked their director to come with me the next time she was feeling frustrated about a process. And the very next day, she called me and said, I'm really frustrated with how long it takes to get this report that I keep asking for that we need every time we go to the board. Should we do that as a go-see? So she and I sat with 3 different people and we watched the work that they needed to do to compile the report, get it reviewed, get the topic onto the agenda, et cetera, et cetera. The director was really surprised about what needed to go into producing this work and said going to see it made it really clear to her what she needed to do to support the change. And the kicker was when I asked her, what was your instinct for how to fix this before you went to go see? She said, you know, what I was going to tell them to do would not have fixed it at all. It actually would have made things worse. I asked her to start telling that story as she worked with her leaders to get them out of their desks and going and seeing. 5 years later, she still tells that story to new leaders as an introduction to the practice that they have there of going to the Gemba, the place where the work is done to solve problems. For her, that story made this action or this change sticky. So think, what can you do to tell a story that will help get your change sticky? Okay, so I'm an anthropologist and I cannot go a whole hour without talking about team culture and how to leverage your culture to your advantage when asking teams to change. I'm going to give you 30 seconds and ask you to write down a few descriptors of your team culture. I'm going to give you a few examples from teams I've worked with, and then I'm going to be quiet for about 30 seconds after I give you a few examples. These are things that were recently written down when I asked the same question about their teams. Tell me a few descriptors of your team culture. One was, we like and enjoy and use friendly competition. Another one was, we see ourselves as connectors. Another one was, we're a team of individual contributors, but we genuinely like each other and collaborate with each other and share ideas. Another one was, we have a heavy focus on control and governance. Another one was, we tend to over-index on operations and under-index on strategy. So those are just some examples. I want you to think about some of the things you would say about your team culture. Think about the change that you thought of earlier and think about the team that needs to change. I'm going to give you 30 seconds now. All right, that was 30 seconds. Hopefully you came up with at least one thing. The team that I worked with who said we like friendly competition started measuring their change with what they called the 100% board, where they would recognize anyone who got 100% for the change they were rolling out. It was like wildfire. Folks wanted so badly to see their name on that board. So they started asking the folks who had their name up there, how did you get there? That idea might not work well in a team that doesn't value friendly competition, but they leveraged their team culture and saw that improve. The team that saw themselves as connectors spent some time thinking about how the change they were implementing helped them connect to others better. And that was really motivating for them. Use your team culture to help your team enculturate the change and possibly avoid the boomerang. Okay, so when change feels difficult to even get going or monumental, we need strategies for getting it started. In times like this, it can be helpful to think about what might be preventing you from getting going. So let's start there. If you aren't getting input for changes, consider whether your team has psychological safety. For any of us to feel safe putting ideas out there and changing, we need to know it's safe to learn, challenge status quo, contribute to the process, and feel included. If change feels challenging in your organization and it's clear folks aren't contributing, there could be something there that isn't helping folks feel safe. Let's talk a bit about each one of these. For learner safety to be present, it has to feel okay to ask questions, to not know, to make a mistake, maybe even fail, and know that you'll be supported by the team. For challenger safety, it has to be okay to suggest a departure from status quo or trying to do something differently. Collaborator safety comes when I know I can contribute, that my ideas, opinions, talents, words will be considered, and that I can add value to the team. And it's critical that everyone feels included. I don't have safety if I'm not invited to the table, included in the conversation, asked for input, and have a say in how things progress. In the short time we have today, I wouldn't be able to dive into this topic with any fidelity, but when I work with leaders and teams, I usually start with the question, what conditions would need to be present in order for you to say, I feel included, I can learn, I can contribute, and I can challenge status quo. I'm going to repeat that one. So I say, what conditions would need to be present in order for you to say, I feel included, I can learn, I can contribute, and I can challenge status quo. By having each individual on a team identify those conditions, it lays out our target for everyone on the team to say, I can make those conditions happen and hold that safety net so everyone can feel present and safe. I want to call out my premise here that people support what they help to create. They feel ownership over the change. They're empowered to make it work when they're included on creating the change. Perhaps you have some folks that aren't contributing on a team. Can you sort out who might feel left out and need to be included? For example, in hybrid meetings, those who are not in the room might feel left out. Call on them first or use the conferencing technology to ensure that they're included. Often on teams, we have specialists, those who don't do what everyone else does, and they can become a team of one and feel left out of the team at large. They also need folks to collaborate with, and they might feel left out when not solicited for input. I have a client who has teams in offices all over the state, but some are very small offices that are satellites of others, and perhaps some folks are in the office and others are in the field. Oftentimes, those newest to a team have the most to offer, but they might feel hesitant to contribute because they feel like they don't know. And also, those who feel other from the team might not feel like they can or should contribute. Find ways to invite and welcome them into the work. I don't know if y'all could hear that train whistle, but that was my cue to drink some water. So hopefully you looked up for a moment, took a sip of water, or did something healthy for yourself. Let's talk about making problems visible. So another strategy for change as a rock is to create a case for change by making the problems the change is designed to solve for visible. One of the best summers of my professional career was spent in a warehouse building the medical center of the future out of cardboard. Let me be clear, the changes we were building were going to be huge. Doctors would no longer have offices. Instead, they'd be sitting side by side with nurses. That was one change. We also had doctors, nurses, and other team members, and even patients involved in designing the change, but not everyone could be designing the future state at all times. To account for that, we captured something on paper to hang up on the cardboard hallways and exam rooms that had decision and rationale to help folks understand what problems were we solving as they came to visit in advance of their building getting built. For example, I had a nurse show up to a design session for the nurse's workstation saying, I was told if I come back with any less than 6 feet of desk space, I shouldn't come back. We ended that day with 2.5 feet of desk space, not 6. And why? Because if we made it 6 feet, the distance of all the desks when laid out would have been a football field or more in length and would have impeded team collaboration, which is something no one wants. The 2.5 feet of space meant everything was close at hand and efficient for use. We tested that. And there was some shared areas for shared equipment that wasn't used often to reduce the footprint. All of this helped us make the problems visible and create that case for change. Take a look at the change you selected earlier and ask yourself, what problem does this change address? And how can we make that problem visible to create a case for change? All right, a few more suggestions, and then we'll get into some Q&A. Another way to get over current state inertia is to experiment. I've had plenty of teams get stuck with multiple ideas for what they could use for a solution, and sometimes they struggle to get to resolution. I found the best way to help folks move through this state if they can't get to consensus on a solution is to run some experiments and have fun with it. Step 1, decide what the winning criteria will be. Will it be the process that gets the best quality or that's the fastest? What about what the customers prefer? Or is there something else that you could use to determine what would win? And then try the options, measure the results, make a decision based on the better process. I once worked with a team that spent the better part of a meeting arguing about which version of a form to use for their customers. Instead of continuing to hash it out, we came up with 2 different prototypes, tried both for a month each, and we were able to tell that one of the forms got better, higher quality input from customers. Everyone was on board because it was the clear winner. So learning together can bring a team closer and get them moving in that target direction. All right, for those of you that downloaded my presentation in advance, you might have been wondering what in the world urinals were doing in my presentation. And speaking of moving in a target direction, a few years ago, Cass Sunstein, co-author of the book Nudge, along with his co-author, economist Richard Thaler, was our keynote speaker for this conference and introduced us to the concept of the nudge. It's a theory in choice architecture that helps humans make a decision in line with a positive result. In this case, the painting of flies on urinals in an airport in the Netherlands helped avoid let's just call it spillage, by giving folks a target to aim for, a desired behavior. Of course, there are plenty of examples of nudge theory in practice. They use it in sales quite a bit, placing dips right by chips in a grocery store designed to increase sales of dip. That medical center I helped design, we changed the flooring where we wanted patients to stand when checking in for their appointments, rather than placing signs that would impede accessibility and were generally ignored anyway. That's a nudge, getting someone to engage in a desired behavior. So how can this concept help you get that rock uphill? Let me give you a real world example. I had a communications team at an agency who frequently had their customers ask for custom pictures to be taken when there was a library of stock images that might work better and would instantly be available. It took a long time to assign the staff photographer to go out and take an image. And by reducing the number of images they needed to take, they knew they could improve their time to delivery, but they needed customers to use stock images when they were available. This team was super frustrated. They had sent emails out. They had let their customers know this option was available, but no one was using it. They had their intake form that let the customer decide, go to stock photos or have a customer produce your photo. And 90% of the time, the customer selected having a photographer produce a photo. After we talked through the nudge concept, the team changed their approach. And on their intake form, the first question they asked was, rather than stock or photographer, they offered two choices. One was get your photo today or schedule your photo for a future production. Can you guess where get your photo today took them? It was directly to the stock photos where they could find what they needed. They measured this about 75% of the time. It was that nudge in the right direction, having the customer think about how soon they wanted it, that helped the customer do what was ideally faster and easier for the customer. Where might a nudge work for your change? I'll give you just a moment to think about that. All right. I'm curious if you have something from today that you feel you might be able to use to help you on the path towards change. We talked about the river, the boomerang, and the rock. Did you come up with at least something that might help you with the change you're considering? What questions do you have for me? Let's open up the Q&A. And I'll turn my camera back on. Let's see if I can keep from freezing.
All right. Well, we have some great questions in the chat. One of those is, I feel I'm in all three modes at the same time. Our organization has had a lot of change in management. My team will get management up to speed about our program, and the changes needed to be efficient, but then that person leaves and we have to start over again. This has been happening for 5 years. We don't have the funding to make the changes we need. We need upper management to help us, but we feel we're on a constant merry-go-round. How do we stop the machine?
Well, going back to the circle of influence there, that might be a change you don't necessarily have control over. So first consider that. The problem with leadership change is that becomes a disconfirming event, right? Things are no longer status quo. You feel like you're back at step one. I would have the teams maybe focus on things that are within their control. Be really specific about where you need leadership input. Are there other leaders within the organization? Are there other people that you can get on board as you're thinking about change in the organization and trying to get off the merry-go-round? I don't have an easy solution for that one. That one's difficult. In this culture, we really center ourselves around leaders and what our leaders are willing to do and help us move forward. I don't know that I have great ideas. I would love it if anybody else has something to contribute, or you see my email on there. Feel free to follow up with me later. What's another question, Jeannie?
Great. Another question is, how do you change a culture? And do you have any books you can recommend around that?
I've got an entire bookshelf behind me on changing culture. I'm an anthropologist, so that's literally what I do every day. I don't know that I can answer that question in a minute, but let me try. There are lots of reasons why culture shifts. And if you want to be intentional about moving your culture, it is helpful to sit down with your team. This is something teams frequently do. Sit down with your team and work out what values your team has. What I think doesn't get done after that is to translate those values into behavior. Our culture becomes a collection of behaviors that are encouraged or discouraged at work. If you can translate something like, I'm going to use the example of collaboration. If that's something we value, we need to start to say, what is it that we're looking for when we say collaboration? Does that mean that everyone needs to be included on every decision? What's the process that we use for that? How would we know if someone was not being collaborative? How do we balance that value of being collaborative with something like being able to quickly respond? Sometimes being collaborative means things take more time. So when you're working on shifting or changing your culture, start with one value at a time. Be specific about what behaviors that value should drive and what behaviors are not okay. And then have the conversation about what happens when people exhibit the behavior that isn't accepted. What's another question, Jeannie?
Thank you. So another question is, when the change is agreed on by the organizational leadership but its implementation keeps getting pushed off for other priorities, how do we get others to start or try something that's already been approved?
I have so many thoughts on this. I see this all the time. I might even be so bold as to say this might be the number one thing that I see is timelines getting pushed out. If everyone agrees, there's several things at play here. Either we don't have the resources. It's most frequently resources are devoted to too many things at a time. And that's when I like to say, limit your work in progress. As humans, we can only focus on so many things at a time. Try to get started. Is there something small that you can do that would nudge people in that direction? So think about the nudge on that. But timelines is only one of your potential countermeasures. Consider whether you could reduce scope and do it in phases. Consider whether you could put more resources on it to avoid the timeline slipping out. Unfortunately, because time keeps passing, that becomes our default. So see what else you can put in place as a countermeasure rather than just missed deadlines. How about one more, Jeannie?
Okay, so how can work in progress be managed when customer demand outpaces staff resources? And at the other end of the process, lack of providers, or takes a while to find the right provider, think field staff, social workers, etc.
Yeah. All right. So I have a whole teaching on this one. This is another one. You guys are asking great questions that are really difficult to answer in a soundbite, but I'm going to do my best. So your customer demand is high. We often don't want to reduce customer demand, but that's one lever that you have. Are you getting people pulling for demand that maybe should not be, or that need to be rerouted somewhere else to get better results? That often isn't the case. And I don't think that was the question. So I want to talk about the other two levers that you have. The next lever that you have is flow. So every time you need to meet customer demand, how do you reduce the effort that it takes to connect one, right? How do we get them where they need to go and have that you said a lack of providers, or I'm going to say resources on the other end to meet that demand. If every time I'm trying to meet demand for one, it takes me 6 hours, if it only takes me 3 hours instead of 6, I can meet double. I can handle double the demand. That's how that works. The last concept, or the last lever that you have, is called leveling. So that might be leveling across time, not letting certain folks into the system until you're actually ready to receive them, or potentially leveling across people. Are there other folks who can do part of the process and then hand over to somebody to do a more complex part of the process? Again, without a lot of detail, I can just tell you, you've got 3 levers: demand, flow, and leveling. And so good luck. That one's a complex one, and involves some math and maybe a whole day on training to figure out how to get that steady flow. That's what you're going for.
Thank you. So there were a couple questions that we weren't able to get to today. Is it okay for people to reach out to you, or how would you like to?
My email is on the screen. It's Jennifer@considerallangles.com. And I'm happy to field additional questions or connect with you, or hear what your successes are. I'm always learning. Was there something today that you thought might be a great tip or trick that you'd like to share with me? And I'm happy to bring that. Maybe I'll be back next year. That'll be 11 years for me.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. And right before we go, and maybe my colleagues can put this in the chat as well, could you provide the titles on the 2 recommended books again?
Yes. So one is Switch, and the other is Made to Stick. And they're both written by Chip and Dan Heath, Heath.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. This has been an amazing presentation, and we loved having you here. It's great content, and I'm going to share my screen again just to provide a couple of reminders. So for those of you who were here today, we would really appreciate it if you would take our survey that's going to pop up. We do use your feedback when we set up the conference for the next year. I'd also like to invite you to our monthly Lean Community of Practice. We have topic teachings, and we share our implementations and real life projects. And we also have time for the community to discuss things that they want to know more about, or some concerns or challenges that they might be having. It's a wonderful forum, and all the information about how to get connected is on our results.wa.gov website. Additionally, we do monthly public performance reviews with Governor Inslee, where we discuss some challenges that we're facing as a state, progress that we've made, and new actions that we might need to take to continue to solve that challenge. And we'd love it if you had joined us in person, or join us live on TVW, or just hit the website up and watch those TVW recordings after the fact if you're not able to make it. I can tell you that firsthand that they are really interesting, and it's really exciting to see some of the things that we're doing in state government. And so with that, we're going to sign up for this session, and we'll see you in a couple hours for the next one. Bye, everyone.